Hi, I'm Brinley. My family clapped when my brother-in-law talked about artificial intelligence like he'd invented it. They nodded, praised him, even printed his face on a banner. When I tried to speak up, just once, they shushed me with a smile. They called me quiet, humble, the one who organizes things. But what if the quiet one was the architect behind everything they were celebrating? What if the phone call that exposed the truth didn't just ring, it rang for me? And what if the person they mocked was the one who held all the power the whole time? Would they still laugh then? Or would they finally hear me? My phone buzzed with a notification just as I was finishing my second cup of reheated coffee, lukewarm but familiar. The message was from my mother. "If you're free, drop by tomorrow evening. We're doing a little dinner, nothing formal." I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, letting the words settle. Just dinner. Nothing formal. If I was free. There was something about the tone. Casual, almost careless. No specific time. No mention of who'd be there. No acknowledgement that I'd flown back to Oregon after 3 weeks of 12-hour days, government briefings, and sleep stolen in airports. But sure, if I was free. I opened Instagram more out of reflex than curiosity. That's when it hit. A photo posted by my sister Ophalie, perfectly framed and filtered. Our parents' dining room draped in pastel streamers, a gold tech star banner above the fireplace, and front and center, Darien, her husband, grinning in a pressed navy suit. The caption read, "Tomorrow's gonna be special, celebrating our genius. Sock family pride, sock Darien leads AI." I blinked, rereading it. There it was, an actual invitation, professionally designed, formal, and not sent to me. I clicked the photo to enlarge it. There in the corner of the image sat a printed card, Guest of Honor, Darien Voss, Visionary in Artificial Intelligence. No mention of Brinley. No P.S. Your sister's flying in too. Just Darien, and a party I apparently wasn't part of. The next day, I drove to my parents' house with a duffel bag tossed into the back seat and my hair still damp from a rushed shower. I wore jeans, a forest green pullover, and sneakers, the kind of thing you wear to a family meal, not a gala. The moment I stepped through the front door, it was clear. I didn't match the room. Everyone else was dressed like they were heading to a country club brunch. Ophalie floated toward me in a champagne satin dress, glass of white wine in hand. "Oh, you came after all," she said, as if surprised. As if it hadn't occurred to her I'd show up. I managed a smile. "Yeah, Mom said to drop by." She tilted her head. "Right. We weren't sure if you were back in town yet." "I landed yesterday." "Well, we're just getting started. Come in, make yourself comfortable." I moved past her into the living room. Every corner shimmered with metallic balloons and banners. A slideshow played on the television. Photos of Darien giving talks, Darien shaking hands, Darien standing in front of a whiteboard. Not one photo included me. Not even in the background. I made my way to the sideboard, poured myself a glass of flat lemonade, and tried not to look like I just realized I was an uninvited guest at my own family's celebration. Aunt Mallory, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, walked up beside me. "Brinley, right?" she said brightly. "You work with Darien, don't you? Are you his assistant?" I smiled tightly. "No, not exactly." "Oh, I thought you handled his scheduling or something like that," she said, waving her hand as if the details didn't matter. Before I could respond, Ophalie appeared again. "She helps coordinate things," she said smoothly. "Bryn's amazing at organizing people." A laugh. A nod. The conversation shifted. Darien stood across the room, laughing with Uncle Ron. He looked over, gave me a small wave. He hadn't heard the exchange, or pretended not to. I excused myself before my face betrayed me. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter and pulled out my phone. I opened the internal dashboard of my division at Synergy Tech. My name, Dr. Brinley Amora, Lead AI Research, glowed beneath the team status board. 47 team members, 2 cross-agency projects, and one pending federal approval I'd spearheaded from concept to budget clearance. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I glanced at my reflection in the microwave door. A woman in casual clothes, underdressed, overlooked, mistaken for an assistant. One foot in a world where I led teams that shaped government infrastructure, the other in a family where I was invisible, and I had walked right into it. Again. The chairs had been rearranged since I stepped outside. A makeshift podium stood at the far end of the dining room, flanked by a banner that read, "Tech Future Family Legacy." Darien stood in front of it, holding a wireless microphone as if this were a TED Talk and not a family dinner. He cleared his throat and tapped the mic twice for attention. "Before we eat," he said, "I just want to thank you all for being here to celebrate not just Easter, but the progress we've made in integrating artificial learning into human systems." I stood behind a line of folding chairs, just outside the frame of family photos being snapped. The room was quiet, respectful. My father leaned forward in his seat, nodding enthusiastically. Uncle Mike gave a soft whistle of admiration. Darien continued, "With our latest model, we're moving from human-coded AI to what I like to call manual intelligence, where the machine mimics strategic inputs at a pace and pattern that simulate intentional design. Manual intelligence, human-coded AI. I bit the inside of my cheek. Those phrases didn't mean what he thought they meant, and definitely not in that order. My brain couldn't help cataloging the inaccuracies, mentally correcting each slide he advanced behind him. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my day job, I was paid to dissect, correct, and streamline language just like that. But here, I was the silent one in the back of the room, the sister without a seat at the table of ideas. Applause broke out as Darien wrapped up. My father turned to Ophelie with a grin I hadn't seen since I won the high school science fair. "He's really onto something," he said. Ophelie beamed. "He's always had such vision." I exhaled quietly and turned toward the kitchen. Ophelie and two of our aunts were arranging platters of roasted vegetables and deviled eggs. Their voices floated in and out of my earshot like an old radio I wasn't trying to tune into, but couldn't tune out. "She's always been bright," Ophelie was saying, "but you know Bryn, so quiet, hard to bring out of her shell." "She's the one who used to write stories, right?" one aunt asked. "Or was it something with graphics?" The other chimed in. "No," Ophelie laughed. "She works in tech now. Kinda like Darien, but behind the scenes. She hates the spotlight." I stood just out of view, gripping the tray of dinner rolls I was supposed to be carrying. There it was. Not dismissal, but diminishment. I didn't fail in their eyes. I just never really existed in a way they'd understand. I wasn't the one who does AI, or the one leading cross-sector integration. I was the quiet one, the girl with a laptop, the sister who didn't make a fuss. I stepped out to the back porch to catch my breath. The air was cooler than I expected, tinged with that spring mix of lilac and damp grass. It smelled like childhood, like disappointment. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the home screen for a second before opening Slack. A message from my East Coast team blinked at the top. "Hey Bryn, your new parameter test killed. We're moving forward with D-Tree Model V4. Federal groups asking if you can lead integration by next quarter. Unreal work." I smiled, but only with the corner of my mouth. Then I swiped the message away. No one here would ask what a D-Tree was. They wouldn't know what federal group meant. If I said model performance, they'd think I meant posing for a magazine. And that wasn't their fault. Not really. But it still hurt. Not because they didn't know, because they never wanted to. I sat on the porch swing and watched the wind push through the trees, shifting light across the grass like something unbothered by who clapped in what room. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they'd see me. I made the mistake of sitting too close to the buffet table. With the lunch crowd thinning and the kids wandering into the backyard, I ended up in earshot of one of my younger cousins, Cameron maybe, who couldn't have been older than 20. He nudged another cousin and chuckled. Didn't Brinley used to do Darien's slide decks back in the day? I didn't flinch, but inside something twisted. Not the surprise of being misrepresented. That had long worn off. But the precision of the wound. Because yes, I had made slide decks before. Not for Darien, though. For my own teams, my own budget reviews, my own national briefings. But once, during a Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago, Darien had joked about how I made the smart stuff look pretty. And it stuck. My father had laughed. Everyone had. No one remembered what I had corrected him on after. Only that Darien had spoken first and loudest. The smell of garlic rolls brought me back, but not before a deeper memory lodged in. A year ago, my division had prepared a major proposal for a grant to integrate predictive AI in transportation logistics. I had drafted every data model, coordinated the research, and built the final presentation. 23 slides, streamlined for both policymakers and tech executives. But the day of the pitch, I couldn't be in DC due to a medical emergency in my team. Darien, who was consulting for the partner firm, stepped in to present. He removed my name. The email read, "To streamline branding." I didn't respond. I didn't fight it. And I certainly didn't correct Ophélie when she posted a photo of Darien at the podium with the caption, "So proud of my husband for pushing AI boundaries and representing our family so well." I scrolled past the post on my lunch break. I remember the taste of my lukewarm tuna wrap going flat in my mouth. Back in the present, the slideshow was looping again. I hadn't paid it much attention earlier, too focused on staying invisible in plain sight. But now my gaze caught on the transition. The screen displayed a side-by-side comparison of two AI dashboard interfaces. My dashboards, color scheme, layout, even the error diagnostics on the bottom right, identical. I had designed them from scratch. The slide transitioned to Darien holding a tablet in front of a whiteboard, speaking to a small team of interns. The caption read, "Project Lead, Darien Voss." I sat completely still. No one noticed. No one turned. I doubt anyone in that room had the technical knowledge to recognize what I saw, let alone trace it back to me. They'd rather believe Darien had done it all. It fit better in their story, the charismatic son-in-law who brought tech to the family. I could have stood up and said something. I could have pointed at the screen and named every line of code, every decision-making node, every sleepless night spent perfecting that interface. But I didn't, because I knew what would follow. "Oh, Bryn, don't make this about you. Can't you just be happy for him? You always get so sensitive." So I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I had learned what battles were worth fighting, and what lies people would cling to even if you handed them proof on a silver platter. Instead, I watched my family cheer for someone else's reflection of my work, and I remembered every time I let it happen. Every holiday meal where I was the footnote, the afterthought, the, "She's doing great, just quiet." I wasn't quiet, I was erased. Maybe I was never invisible, they just decided not to see me. The applause had died down, and conversations picked back up like nothing monumental had just happened. Plates clinked softly. Someone opened a second bottle of wine. I stayed seated, replaying Darien's half-baked tech jargon in my head, word for word, none of which anyone else in the room had questioned. I finally spoke, not loudly, just enough to be heard. Actually, what Darien described isn't manual intelligence. That's not a real classification. Before I could finish, my mother, who had been passing out linen napkins, tapped my shoulder and smiled as if we were in a sitcom. "Let's not turn this into a debate, sweetheart," she said lightly, like we were choosing between pie flavors and not reality itself. My father chuckled from across the room. "Darien's just trying to explain it simply for the rest of us." I opened my mouth again, then stopped. There it was. That tone, that gentle redirection cloaked in affection, weaponized into dismissal, and worse, the way it worked. The conversation moved on, quickly, back to garden renovations and my cousin's new Pilates studio. I sat still, folding my hands in my lap like a child in timeout. Darien didn't even look in my direction. He was too busy pouring another glass of Pinot for Uncle Rob, who nodded at him like they were old college buddies instead of two people who couldn't code their way through a calculator app. I excused myself before the heat crawling up my chest reached my face. The kitchen was blessedly empty. I leaned against the counter, pulled out my phone. My fingers were colder than I expected. A red notification on my home screen caught my eye. An unread email. It was from our federal agency contact. I opened it, read it 3 times to be sure. Subject: Congratulations. Full funding approved. The message was short, clean, and powerful. Your D-tree model is officially greenlit. Full integration into Phase 2 scheduled. Thank you for leading the most technically sound proposal in this quarter. I held the phone in my hand for a full minute before locking the screen. I walked back toward the living room slowly. My father was now asking Darien about his MIT interest. Darien launched into a tale about a webinar series he might guest speak on. My dad leaned in, clearly impressed. I stepped close, waited for a break in the conversation. Dad, I just got an email. My team's project was fully funded. The D-tree rollout. Hang on, he said, raising one finger. Your brother-in-law was just talking about MIT. Don't interrupt. I nodded. I stepped back. The room didn't notice my retreat. I moved to the corner by the fireplace, where no one else stood. I checked the email again, not because I doubted it, just to remind myself it was real. They wouldn't understand the work, but they could have understood the importance. They just didn't care to. Dinner was announced soon after. Everyone gathered at the long table set for 14, with Ophelie and Darien in the center, flanked by my parents. I was near the far end, between Aunt Mallory and a cousin's empty booster seat. I didn't mind. The chatter continued, light and easy, the way families do when they pretend there's no tension. Darien was telling a story, something about mentoring a startup intern. Ophelie chimed in with pride. My mother laughed, full and glowing. I cut into my roast lamb and chewed slowly. He's been inspiring young minds, Aunt Linda said from across the table, raising her glass toward Darien. I looked at my plate, at the thin slice of meat I had cut with surgical precision. I didn't say a word. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't correct anyone. I smiled. Not a sarcastic grin, not a forced smirk, just a calm, centered expression. Because something in me had broken, not in the way that makes you fall apart, but in the way that makes you finally see things as they are. They wouldn't hear me if I shouted, so I stopped shouting. If speaking didn't change anything, maybe silence would. Dinner was already being served when Mom tapped my elbow and gestured toward the kitchen. Could you help reset the table for dessert, honey? She asked in that voice that made it seem like I hadn't been helping all day. Darien was reclined in the living room armchair, his legs crossed, glass of red in hand. He was talking animatedly to 2 of my uncles, throwing around words like algorithmic insights and cross-industry disruption, like he'd invented them. I carried a stack of clean plates, careful not to let them clatter. Ophelie intercepted me halfway through the dining room with a tray of silverware. You've always had a way with presentation, sis, she said, all polished teeth and sweet tone. I smiled. Because that's what we do, isn't it? Smile when you're handed something heavy and told it's a compliment. As I laid out the place settings, something sharp twisted in my chest. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It felt more like realization settling where pride used to be. When I placed the last fork beside the final plate, I took a breath and sat down. The chair was colder than I expected. My father was asking Darien about the time he supposedly spoke at Stanford. Darien downplayed it, of course. Oh, just a guest session, no big deal. The last time my name came up in a university context, it had been different. A year ago, I'd hit a major milestone at work. Our pilot project had launched ahead of schedule, and I'd gotten word that we were shortlisted for a conference at the University of Chicago. I'd told Dad, casually, one Sunday call. He'd said, well, if you land it, let me know. We'll fly out together. I had landed it. And then watched from my hotel room when Ophelia posted photos of Dad and Darien at a tech leadership event in Boston. They'd gone together. When I asked, weeks later, Dad said, "I figured you were probably busy. I didn't want to bug you." And I had smiled then, too. Now, back at the table, Darien launched into a monologue about mentorship, something about training the next wave of machine learning architects. He'd barely managed the interns we assigned him. Ophelia giggled beside him. "He's being modest." "Darien's always been gifted," Mom chimed in. I watched my wine glass catch the light. I could see their reflections in it, talking, laughing, celebrating each other. Then Ophelia turned toward me, her voice lilting. "Bryn, you still doing the back-end stuff? You always explain it better than I do, even though I don't quite follow the acronyms." A few heads turned in my direction. Not many. I set my fork down slowly and met her gaze. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and even, "I've led 3 federal AI projects in the past 2 years. One of them was recently approved for national infrastructure rollout." The room stilled. Not frozen, not hostile, just still. Ophelia blinked. "Oh, wow, I didn't realize." "I know," I said. "Thank you for always believing I couldn't." No sarcasm, no bite, just truth, laid down like the silverware. Silence stretched a beat too long before someone cleared their throat. Someone else asked about dessert. And just like that, conversation rerouted itself around me again. But this time, I didn't mind. For the first time that day, I wasn't the one serving the story. They were. I stepped onto the back porch just as the sky turned the color of brewed tea. The last of the daylight painted everything in gold. It was quieter out there, quieter than inside where dessert was being passed around like a trophy Darien had won, and everyone else got to share in. I didn't realize I wasn't alone until the screen door creaked softly behind me. "Etta," my grandmother moved with that kind of grace you earn after 7 decades of knowing when to talk and when to simply sit beside someone. She held 2 mugs. The steam swirled upward like smoke from a story not yet told. She didn't speak at first, just handed me one of the cups and sat on the bench, leaving room beside her. "You don't have to prove anything," she finally said, "to people who already decided what they want to believe." It hit me harder than any backhanded comment or accidental exclusion. I didn't cry. That would have been too easy. But something in my chest loosened, like a knot that had been yanked tighter every holiday, every overlooked accomplishment, every family dinner where I became the background. We sat in silence, sipping tea. Hers smelled like chamomile. Mine was mint. It made sense. She'd always been the balm, steadying me with her presence. I used to think she didn't see it all, that she was too busy being the gentle peacemaker to notice the fractures in the room. But she did. She always had. After a while, I checked my phone, more out of habit than anything. The screen glowed with a new post from Ophelia. A photo of Darien standing in front of one of the projects I had co-designed, clearly taken during last year's pilot presentation, the one I'd invited them both to and neither attended. The caption read, "So proud of the real tech genius in our family. Just leadership, innovation, sac blessed." No mention of me. Not tagged, not even in the comments. Just Darien, looking slightly off-angle, as if even he knew the moment didn't fully belong to him. I stared at the image for a beat too long before locking the phone and slipping it back into my sweater pocket. The mint tea cooled between my fingers. "People post what makes them feel important," Etta said without looking at me. "But legacy isn't in a picture, it's in what lasts." I nodded, grateful she didn't push. She never needed to fill silence to make it count. When I stood to go back inside, I was steadier. The dining room was still buzzing, though the energy had mellowed. Plates scraped, laughter echoed, and someone was already wrapping leftovers in foil. I stepped through the doorway, caught Darien's eye, then Ophelia's. I didn't smile. I didn't frown either. I just nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I see you. I know what game you think you're playing, but I stopped playing years ago." Then I walked over to the corner of the room where the kids were comparing plastic egg contents. I bent down, picked up a lone jelly bean, and handed it to the youngest, who beamed like I'd given her $100 bill. They thought they were winning a game I stopped playing years ago. Dinner was running late, but no one seemed to mind. The living room lights dimmed just slightly, and I noticed Ophelie fiddling with the TV remote. She called out in her usual cheerful tone, "Okay, everyone, before we eat, just a little something we put together for our favorite innovator." I sank a little deeper into the couch, suddenly aware of how tightly my arms were crossed. The screen flickered to life, and a slideshow began. Bold white text over a blue background. Darien's tech journey, a legacy of leadership. It had the polish of something a marketing team might make in a rush, probably cobbled together by Ophelie and Canva. The first few slides were harmless enough. Photos of Darien in front of office buildings, Darien standing beside whiteboards, Darien posing with generic tech conference backdrops. The usual puff. Then the fifth slide hit, and I felt something inside me still. There it was. My dashboard. My actual dashboard interface from the second quarter integration test, except cropped just enough to cut out the developer credit in the bottom corner. The color palette, the alignment, even the data dummy string on the top left. All mine. Every pixel. A few people clapped. My father spoke up from across the room, his voice full of pride. "That looks impressive, Darien." Darien didn't respond, just sipped from his wineglass and nodded modestly. I didn't say a word. I just stared, like I was watching someone steal something from me in slow motion and dress it in gift wrap. Later, as the lights returned to normal, and people began milling around toward the dining room, I made my way through the hallway, trying to catch my breath. That's when I heard her. Ophelie. She was talking to two of my mom's friends, standing near the kitchen counter. "Brinley's always been brilliant," she said, her voice sugar-coated. "But you know how quiet she is. Never liked the spotlight. Darien kind of helps speak for her sometimes." They both nodded. One of them added, "That's so sweet. Not many people are comfortable being behind the scenes like that." I froze. Not behind the scenes. Behind the theft. And the worst part wasn't what she said. It was how effortlessly she said it. As if that version of me was true. As if it had always been true. I moved past them, unnoticed, invisible in real time. Back in the dining room, the table had been reset for dinner. I returned to my seat, let the conversations roll around me like background noise. Ophelie caught my eye as she passed by, probably expecting a smile or a nod. I didn't give her either. Instead, I waited for her to sit. Then, with deliberate clarity, I spoke. "You've mistaken my silence for absence," I said, my voice calm and even. "They're not the same." Ophelie froze, her smile faltering. Darien shifted in his chair. The room around us stilled, conversations pausing as the air changed just enough for everyone to notice. I didn't wait for anyone to ask a follow-up. I stood, pulled my napkin off my lap, and walked out. Not fast, not dramatic. Just removed. Let them finish dinner without me. Let them talk around the hole I left behind. Let them try to fill the space I'd no longer be occupying in their narrative. They couldn't erase what they never truly understood. We were halfway through dessert when Darien started in again. Cherry pie in one hand, glass of Merlot in the other. He launched into yet another story about his team and the integration model they were supposedly pioneering. My spoon paused mid-air. I wasn't even mad anymore, just numb. The way you get after hours of pretending not to hear yourself being erased. "And with the new infrastructure package rolling through Congress," he said, grinning as if he were testifying before a Senate committee, "we're lining up for some major partnerships. I've already had 2 contractors reach out. The agency's watching what we're building." That was the moment his phone buzzed on the table beside him. He didn't pick it up. The room was too focused on his voice to notice. But after the second buzz, the screen lit up, and the speakerphone connected automatically. "Hello, Dr. Amora. This is Jason McClellan with US Systems. Just following up on the D-Tree deployment scope. The team needs final specs from you by Monday. Can you confirm you'll lead integration and own delivery timeline? Silence. The phone kept the line open. Jason's voice crackled slightly before he added, "Just want to say, the tech your team delivered. Really next-level work, ma'am." Every sound in the room disappeared. Darien stared at the phone like it had morphed into a snake. Ophelie was frozen, fork dangling above her plate. My father blinked, glancing at me, then Darien, then me again. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. I reached forward and without a word, tapped the phone screen to end the call. No one moved. Then came the voice that cracked the silence. Soft, measured, but sharp enough to cut glass. Grandma Etta from the end of the table. "So, Brinley, is that why your company just bought his?" Her tone was the same one she used when asking if someone had remembered to water the roses. Light, almost curious, except it landed like a bomb. My mother looked at Darien with actual confusion now. My father leaned back slowly, his napkin still in hand, motionless. Ophelie's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. No one looked at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Darien coughed. "That call, that was just a formality," he muttered, reaching for his wine. "We're collaborating on multiple projects, shared resources." I tilted my head. "You mean the project where your team reports to mine?" His neck turned pink. "It's cooperative oversight." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting phrasing." The room shifted then, not with sound, with stillness, with the absence of rebuttal. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just let the silence hold. Etta nodded once and took a sip of her tea. No one picked up their utensils. No one returned to their pie. That's how you know the truth hit, when dessert goes untouched. Aunt Mallory cleared her throat, the sound too loud in the quiet. My mother reached for the pitcher of water, but didn't pour. Ophelie looked like she wanted to disappear into the polished wood grain of the table. And me? I sat there, watching them watch each other, watching me. You could hear a pin drop, right before the truth filled every inch of that room. After the call ended, no one spoke for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably 30 seconds, just enough time for everyone at the table to reprocess everything they thought they knew. Eventually, plates were cleared. Conversations resumed, clumsily, like a skipped track trying to find its rhythm. Someone made a joke about the wine being too dry. Someone else laughed too loud. The air was heavy, but coated in a thick layer of, "Let's pretend that didn't just happen." I stayed quiet, which had become my most strategic move lately. As the dishes were being shuffled into the kitchen and people trickled into small pockets of conversation, I saw my father sink into his recliner in the living room. He pulled out his phone, tapping through emails with the same intensity he used when scanning bills or reading HOA notices, probably trying to feel useful, relevant. And then his fingers paused. His brow furrowed. The silence returned, not the awkward kind, but the kind that prickled the back of your neck. He slowly turned his phone so the screen faced him, adjusting his glasses like he thought maybe they were smudged. Then he looked up at me. No words, just looked. "Brinley," he said after a beat, "you're the director of... what now?" I didn't move from where I stood near the fireplace. "Strategic integration," I replied calmly, "at Synergy Tech." He blinked again and cleared his throat. I just opened something that came to my work email by mistake. Looked like a government memo forwarded from your team." I nodded once. "Probably part of the cross-agency alignment. It's a new protocol for shared access." Darien shifted on the edge of the couch, arms now crossed. He didn't say a word. My father studied me like he was seeing someone new, or someone he'd known all along, but hadn't truly looked at. Then came the voice that cracked the mood again. "Wait," my teenage cousin said from the hallway. "You're that Dr. Amora?" Everyone turned. I didn't flinch. "Depends what you mean by that." "The one from the AI ethics interview that went viral last month?" My professor made us read that piece for class. A soft murmur swept the room. My mother opened her mouth, then, for once, closed it again. Ophelie was suddenly very interested in her fingernails. For once, I didn't need to explain myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed them context. One of my uncles stepped forward, scratching the back of his neck. "Hey, Bryn, I owe you an apology. I didn't realize what you were doing was that major." I shrugged lightly. "It's okay. You weren't the only one." My youngest niece peeked out from behind a chair and whispered to her dad, "I want to be like Aunt Brinley." The words weren't for me, but I heard them anyway. Ophelie eventually approached, her smile trying to find its footing. "That's amazing, Bryn. Really. I wish I had understood more about what you do." I let her hang there for a second. "You could have asked," I said, not harshly, just honestly. She nodded, blinking too quickly. "I know." I thanked her, that was all. I didn't soothe her. I didn't make the moment easier than it was. Growth, I'd learned, didn't come with applause. Later, I slipped into the hallway bathroom just to breathe. I didn't need quiet anymore. I just wanted space to feel the shift. The balance had changed. They weren't clapping. They weren't fawning. They were simply sitting in the presence of a truth too loud to deny. And for once, I didn't have to shout it to be heard. The truth hadn't just been revealed. It had been accidentally accepted. The dining room was quieter than it had been all day. No one spoke about work anymore, or tech, or anything that might circle back to Darien. His seat was still there, pushed slightly away from the table, napkin folded too neatly, like someone had tried to tidy up the absence. He hadn't returned from the hallway since the call. No one dared fill his spot. Conversation shifted to safer ground. Weather, travel plans, a cousin's upcoming wedding. But the shift was hollow. People were talking just to keep their hands busy, their minds distracted. I sipped from my water glass and said little. I didn't need to say anything anymore. Every once in a while, someone's eyes would drift back to me, linger for a second longer than they used to. Not in pity, not in obligation, but with something closer to awareness, maybe even respect. That seat may have been empty, but for the first time, mine was not. After dishes were cleared, I helped load the dishwasher without being asked. I moved with ease, not out of duty, but choice. Mom entered the kitchen while I wiped down the counter. She hesitated, fiddling with a tea towel. "You know your brother-in-law didn't mean anything by it," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, like she was testing the weight of each word before letting it land. I rinsed the sponge and didn't look up. "Didn't mean what, Mom?" "All that. Boasting. He's just under pressure, you know, trying to feel valuable." I turned slowly. "So am I," she blinked. "That's not what I meant." I nodded. "But it's what I heard." Silence stretched between us. Then she reached for a bowl and began drying it. "You've always been good at what you do," she said finally. "I'm sorry I didn't understand how much." I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't have to. Some things weren't about apologies. They were about noticing what had been missed. Dad stepped in just then, holding 2 coffee mugs. He handed one to me. "You like what you're doing?" I held his gaze. "I don't do it for pride." He nodded once. "No? I do it because it matters." He exhaled, almost like relief. "It does. You matter." That was all, but it was more than I'd ever heard before. Later that evening, after the kitchen was clean and most of the family had dispersed into small groups, I stepped out onto the back porch. The sky was deep blue, stars just beginning to prick the horizon. I sat alone until a voice broke the quiet. "Can I sit?" It was Natalie, one of the youngest cousins, maybe 13, maybe 14. She held a soda in one hand and her phone in the other. I gestured to the step beside me. "Sure," she hesitated. "I was wondering, for my school project next month, we're supposed to shadow someone. Could I, maybe, shadow you?" I looked at her. She didn't say it with fanfare. No performance. Just quiet curiosity. Real. Yeah, I said. You can. She smiled and started talking about science class. And I listened. Not because I had to, but because I saw myself in her. Inside, I glimpsed through the window as my aunt quietly unplugged the laptop still connected to the TV. The slideshow had been paused since earlier. No one said a word about it. Something had shifted. They hadn't rewritten history, but they'd stopped reciting the wrong version out loud. His chair might have been empty, but mine had never been more full. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background. The sink was empty now, dishes long scrubbed and stacked. Mom stood at the counter, folding the same dish towel over and over, like she couldn't quite remember how to stop. I dried a glass beside her, the silence between us stretching. Not tense, not hostile, just loaded. She broke it first. I didn't know you were doing all that, she said, not quite looking at me. I kept drying the same glass. You didn't ask. The towel in her hand stilled. She set it down. I should have. That was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever said. And for once, I didn't rush to make it easier for her. We didn't speak again for several minutes. I finished drying the glass, placed it gently in the cabinet, and leaned against the counter. We stood there, side by side, like two women who had finally stopped pretending they weren't strangers. When I finally left the kitchen, Dad was out on the porch. A mug of decaf coffee rested on the table in front of him, untouched. I slid open the door and joined him, the cold air brushing against my arms as I sat. I kept waiting, he said quietly after a few minutes. For you to speak up. I tilted my head. I thought when you were ready, you'd ask for space to say what mattered. I didn't realize it wasn't about readiness. I watched the night sky. One star blinked just above the horizon, faint but steady. You thought I'd fight for space, I said, but I was too busy trying to prove I deserved to be in the room at all. He nodded slowly. I should have given it first. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't have to. I heard it in the way he didn't try to explain himself. We sat like that for a while, not in resolution, in recognition. Later, back in the guest room, I changed into an old t-shirt and pulled the covers up around me. I stared at the ceiling, letting the silence settle again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. There was no grand speech, no standing ovation, just small shifts. And maybe that was enough. The slideshow was gone. The applause had faded. No one was pretending anymore. Not me, not them. Not all the fractures would heal. Some didn't need to. Some had been illusion all along. But I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Lighter. I hadn't rewritten my story. I just started reading it out loud. I woke before the sun did. The house was still. The kind of quiet you only get after a storm has passed, and everyone is too tired to pretend anymore. I moved slowly through the guest room, folding my things with care I didn't usually give them. This room, with its dusty floral curtains and mismatched dresser knobs, had held versions of me my family never took the time to meet. I zipped my duffel and laid my blazer on top, smoothing the fabric once before tucking in my badge. Dr. Brinley Amora, Division Director. It wasn't there to prove anything. It was just mine now. Downstairs, the kitchen lights were off. I left them that way. The morning light was enough. I sat at the table where so many conversations had gone unfinished and pulled a folded piece of paper from my coat pocket. I'd written the note the night before. Not long, not angry, just honest. I'll be back when we talk as equals, not characters you've written me into. B. No signature with love. No need for one. I placed it where I knew Mom would find it first, right next to the coffee maker. I didn't linger. The back door creaked as I closed it behind me, and the air hit cool against my face. The ride was waiting at the curb. I walked toward it with the kind of quiet certainty I used to reserve for conference rooms. Shoulders straight, steps steady. Just as I reached the car, I heard my name. Brinley. I turned. Grandma Etta stood there in her robe and slippers, one hand resting on the porch rail like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away. She didn't rush to me. She didn't make a scene. She just walked until she stood in front of me and then placed both hands gently on my arms. "It took them decades to forget who you were," she said, "and you reminded them in one dinner." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I just smiled and meant it. She reached up, touched my cheek like she had when I was 5 and covered in peanut butter, and said, "Go do what they couldn't even imagine." The driver opened the car door. I didn't look back. As we pulled away, the streets of Ashland blurred by. Familiar sidewalks, the grocery store with the lopsided sign, the cafe Ophelie once said was too hipster for Mom. I leaned my head against the window and watched the town fade into space. "They laughed when he spoke," I whispered, voice barely louder than breath. "They paused when I did nothing, but when the truth called, it used my name." No screaming, no scene, just fact. No one chased me. No one asked me to stay. And for the first time, that didn't feel like rejection. It felt like release. This wasn't revenge. This was recognition, and it was always mine to claim. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones you never announce. I didn't need to raise my voice or wave my credentials in anyone's face. I simply had to stop shrinking to fit a version of myself they were comfortable with. To anyone watching this who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly erased, remember, silence doesn't mean absence, and your worth is not measured by applause, but by impact. Families don't always see us clearly, but that doesn't mean we owe them smallness. We can love them and still outgrow the roles they tried to keep us in. So now I want to ask you, have you ever had to step away from your own family's version of you just to reclaim who you really are? Have you ever felt invisible in a room where you were once told to sit quietly? If so, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a 1 in the comments if this video spoke to something you've lived through. Or tell me where you're watching from. I want to connect with you. And if you didn't like this story, that's okay too. Let me know what didn't land for you and where you're tuning in from. Every perspective matters. If this story touched your heart, or even made you think, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got more real stories coming your way. Because sometimes the best way to be heard is to finally stop asking for permission